All right, we're going to try something a little different with this group of plants. We're going to teach you 4 at one time. All right? Now, before I launch into the specific species, what we're going to talk about are narcissus, the genus Narcissus, what you likely know as daffodils, okay? Now, Narcissus as a genus is a very large group, and if you've learned much about daffodils or about the genus Narcissus, you may know that these are bulb geophytes, okay? Come from bulbs. There's a lot of different types, many types and species, and because of the diversity of the genus Narcissus, they have broken them down into over a dozen different categories, and each category exemplifies a certain unique feature of the daffodils within that group. So over a dozen different groupings within the genus Narcissus, okay? I'll talk about that briefly when we talk about this in lecture, okay? Now, a couple of things just generally about the genus Narcissus, all right? I mentioned to you there are bulbs. The foliage are going to be linear foliage, and this is just one of the leaves I broke off of one of these species. All right, linear foliage, about a foot, maybe 15 inches tall, is generally the height of the plant. The leaves of Narcissus, I'll show you up close in a second, are very glaucous, so they're covered in a waxy, bluish wax, okay? So glaucous leaves, linear, they range from 1/4, maybe up to 3/4 of an inch in diameter. I'm not going to ever ask you to separate Narcissus species by the diameter of the leaves, okay? I'll show you the foliage, but it's going to be the flowers we want to focus on. Now, speaking of the flowers, of all the different types, a couple of things to kind of get us thinking about the genus Narcissus. First of all, we're going to look at the flowers and understand that all the flower parts or floral parts of Narcissus is a perianth, okay? A perianth. And the perianth is highlighted by the center feature of one of these Narcissus, and this is called the corona. The corona. We talked about this in the floral morphology part of the class. So we're going to look at the color, the width, and the height of the corona in the center of the flower. Just as a reminder, the corona is an outgrowth of the perianth, and in this case, the perianth are all the floral parts behind it, okay? So we're gonna look at the size and shape of the corona, the color, and the orientation of the tepal or perianth parts. We're also going to look with Narcissus to look at the size and the number of flowers per stalk. And in Narcissus, the larger the flowers, the fewer per stalk. And in this one example of this species, notice there's only 1 flower per stalk. As you get multiple flowers per stalk, the number of flowers will increase and get smaller and smaller in size, okay? Now, with those general introductions to Narcissus, I want to show you 4 different species, okay? 4 species. All right, first, this is Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus, the trumpet daffodil. All right, do not worry about the foliage because, as I'd mentioned, the foliage of all of these are going to be linear, long, glaucousy, waxy, okay? So all I want to focus on are the flowers. All right, Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus, trumpet daffodil, all right? 1 flower per stalk, yellow on yellow, meaning yellow corona, yellow perianth. This is one of the largest Narcissus, and I'm going to pull back the perianth just to show you the size of the corona. All right, Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus. The corona is easily 1+ inch tall. Now, key ID feature of trumpet daffodil. I'm going to fold the perianth up, and I hope you can notice that the perianth equals about the height of the corona. All right, so again, fold the perianth up, and it's nearly equal to the height of the corona. Key feature for trumpet daffodil, Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus. The second species, Narcissus triandrus, all right, cyclaminius, Narcissus cyclaminius daffodil, all right? Now, cyclaminius, notice, 1 flower per stalk. Look how long the corona is. It's long, narrow, tubular, okay? Long, narrow, tubular. And notice the perianth parts, key ID feature, Narcissus cyclaminius. The perianth parts are reflexed. They're bent backwards. One of the things I always remember with Narcissus cyclaminius, imagine a cyclist biking up to the top of a hill and then going down the hill and their hair flying behind them. Whee! All right, that's what they're doing. The hair is flying behind the cyclist. Do you see that? Narcissus cyclaminius, reflexed petals, long, narrow tube, or corona. All right. Next, Narcissus incomparabilis, small cup daffodil. Narcissus incomparabilis, small cup daffodil, 1 flower per stalk. The perianth is white. The inner short corona is going to be a really, really dark, deep orange. All right. Now, when I fold the perianth over, look at the contrast of that very short corona versus the long perianth. Different than Narcissus pseudo-narcissus. Okay. So, Narcissus incomparabilis, white on the outside, short, dark orange cup or corona. And then lastly, the 4th species of Narcissus, Narcissus triandrus. Narcissus triandrus. Already you see a difference. Notice there are often two flowers per inflorescence, and notice that the flowers are smaller. All right, the more number, the smaller the flowers per stalk. The other neat thing, other than there being 2, if you look at the tepal parts, maybe I turn it around this way, the tepal parts are individually separated. They are not overlapping. Come straight at it this way. The individual tepal parts are separate. They are not overlapping like all of the other narcissus that we just learned. So, in review, all right, Becky, if you just stand up over the whole group. Foliage is going to be the same. Do not worry about foliage. Narcissus, pseudo-narcissus, trumpet daffodil, large corona, perianth laps over, yellow on yellow. Narcissus cyclaminius, all right, 1 flower per stalk, yellow on yellow, long corona, and the reflexed perianth, key feature. Narcissus incomparabilis, 1 flower per stalk, white on a short orange corona. And then lastly, Narcissus triandrus, and this is going to be 2 flowers per stalk. It can be 1 sometimes, but 2 flowers per stalk, smaller, and the individual tepal parts do not touch. Heterohelix, English ivy. A plant you're probably pretty familiar with in many different contexts. Heterohelix, English ivy. Now folks, English ivy, Heterohelix is one of many species of Hedera. Okay, there's lots of species of the ivy, but Heterohelix particularly has been a landscape plant used in ornamental horticulture for a very long time, primarily as a ground cover because this is a vine. Okay, so as a vine, it's used very effectively as a ground cover in retaining walls, retaining beds, things of that nature. The vine itself, they are evergreen. All right. The vines climb by adventitious roots. I'll show you that in just a second. But the leaves are very distinctly, you can come on in, the leaves are going to be alternate and simple. All right, so just taking a look at the vine that I've removed, alternate and simple leaves. And these simple leaves will have 3 to 5 lobes, okay? I'll just kind of move slowly here. And on this one, you can see the lobing on the leaf is pretty distinct for Heterohelix, all right? Alternate simple leaves. Now folks, these vines grow in shade, grow in sun, and as long as Heterohelix remains on the ground, as long as it does not go up a tree, it will remain juvenile. It will remain juvenile, and the key ID feature of juvenile Heterohelix is that it retains the lobing of the leaves, and the leaves stay relatively small, about 2.5 inches long, okay? But given the opportunity to climb up, which is what it naturally wants to do, and that up meaning a fence, a wall, or in this case a tree, as soon as Heterohelix grows up, it will transition to a mature foliage. And at that point, it transitions to being sexually reproductive, and that is where it actually flowers and it fruits, okay? So for right now, I want to show you both stages, all right? I've already shown you the vine form on the ground, alternate leaves. The simple leaves are lobed, all right? They have 3 to 5 lobes. Now, as it starts to grow up, and in this case, you see it growing up a fence, or right behind me here, growing up this tree, it will transition from, maybe I can just show it against the tree itself. This is juvenile, And then notice as the leaves, now I broke this branch out, notice the leaves get larger and they lose the lobing. So they almost turn into deltoid shaped leaves, triangular shaped leaves. Deltoid, larger leaves, they lose the lobing. All of this is very mature foliage, okay? Now I pull this a bit higher up the tree. It takes a few years for it to transition. If I turn it over, right, let me get the other leaves out. You can see the adventitious roots on the back, which is the method by which it climbs. Or even more specifically, look at the vines on this tree to show the adventitious roots of these older vines that have probably been growing up this tree for 15, 20 years, okay? So Becky, if you can just pan up, and I know you can't see the foliage up top very clearly, but the fruit and the flowers would be higher up, and I'll show you what those look like in lecture. But I think between it being a vine as a juvenile and then having this adult foliage as it goes up a tree, easy to identify heterohelix in the landscape. Fatsia japonica, Japanese Aralia. Now, Fatsia is going to be an evergreen shrub that loves and needs shade. Now, this is one of those plants that we'll talk about its cultural needs when identifying it, because you're only going to see Fatsia on the north side of a building or in an alleyway somewhere where there's shade. So this is one of those plants where its placement can aid in you identifying what it is. So, as we can see here, a fairly large evergreen shrub. I think it's going to be a pretty neat plant to identify. The leaf arrangement is alternate and the leaf type is simple. Now, not just simple, but look at the size of these leaves, all right? The petiole on this is almost 18 inches long, all right? Now, of course, that varies on the plant, but very, very long petioles. The leaves are simple, and these simple leaves are deeply lobed, okay? So of all the plants in general, but certainly all of the evergreen plants that we've done, one of the, if not the largest leaf on Fatsia, remember fat leaves, Fatsia japonica, okay? So very distinct leaves on this particular plant. Now, as you can see, these massive clusters of fruit. Now let's go back in time for several weeks, couple of months, and these actually flowered, these terminal large panicles, and the individuals are actually umbel-shaped inflorescence. They actually flowered in December, January, and what you're seeing now are the maturing fruit that are enlarging in size, so the weight is beginning to push down those large fruiting branches. And eventually, in a few more weeks, these big clusters of fruit will turn dark, dark purple. Okay, so the purpose of this late spring or this late winter, early spring, you've got the leaves and you've got these large clusters of developing fruit which will turn purple on Fatsia japonica. Loropetalum chinensis. Loropetalum, common name. Loropetalum chinensis. Now folks, this plant behind us is a nice sized, large specimen of Loropetalum. Now the first thing I will tell you in the overall form of this plant is you're likely going to see it as a lower shrub, okay? So, as is true for most all of the shrubs and trees that we learn, just because I show you a really large one or a really small one, don't memorize that size. Keep in mind that they can be smaller or they can be larger. But most of the time you will see Loropetalums a bit smaller than this one, okay? So, Loropetalum chinensis, this is going to be an evergreen, large shrub. As this example illustrates, they can easily be small trees, okay? A couple of neat features I think is going to make Loropetalum an easy plant to identify, and we'll talk more about its attributes later. Now, the leaves of Loropetalum are going to be simple, they're going to be alternate, all right? And because they're evergreen, they're very coriaceous, very thick, but really nice alternate leaves, all right? Really, really dark green, coriaceous. Now also, whichever leaf is good to zoom in on, the base of the leaf are oblique. The base of the leaves are oblique, and that is when there's more tissue on one side than the other. So taking a look right there, or any of these leaves, there's a bit more tissue on one side of the petiole than the other. Oblique leaf bases, okay? Really nice to see those alternate arrangement, oblique leaf bases. They are covered in dense pubescence. If you can see that up close, I'll try to provide some photographs of that dense pubescence. Let me flip it over. You may be able to see the pubescence on the stems of this particular specimen. All right. Now, other than those unique leaves with oblique leaf bases, looking at the flowers. Now, this begins to really flower in the spring, and notice these axillary clusters of flower buds up and down the stem. And this is one example here of what the flowers will look like. And the flower shape would be ligulate or strap-like. These ligulate, strap-like petals on the flowers almost look like pom-poms. And the color of Loropetalum flowers will be pink or white. Okay, pink or white flowers on these plants. It is also common, as I will show you later, for a purple foliaged form of Loropetalum that also exists. So folks, you can have green foliage or purple foliage, pink flowers or white flowers, mixed and matched on the different types, all right, between the foliage color and the leaf color, and the flower color. All right, so just lastly, Beck, if you could just zoom in on some of the flowers up close, taking a look at probably the most recognizable feature of Loropetalum, those pom-pom flowers, pink or white in color, and these rough, coriaceous, alternate, simple leaves that have oblique leaf bases. All of those things point towards this being Loropetalum chinensis.
Oh.
Muscari armenicum grape hyacinth. Muscari armenicum grape hyacinth. Now folks, this is going to be another geophyte, one of the early flowering geophytes late winter. A couple of neat things. Now first, we'll talk about the foliage, which is not the key aspect of this plant, but the foliage are these long, stringy, grass-like leaves. Quite frankly, they're not attractive at all, but this very long, stringy, grass-like leaves, and I've pulled off a couple here on the clipboard just to show you what those look like, okay? But very long, a foot plus, only about 1/4 of an inch in length, or in width rather, and I'm not going to have you focus at all on the foliage of this. You're never going to see this plant without the flowers, excuse me, okay? You will always have the flowers. Now looking at the flowers, these inflorescences rise above the foliage, okay? They are racemes, and they're going to be urceolate, all right? The individual flowers are urceolate or urn-shaped. I'll show you that in just a minute up close. The flower colors on Muscari armenicum, this purple is most common. There's also white and pink. If you take a look at this inflorescence that I've got broken off and see hopefully the urceolate or urn-shaped flowers, and also the fact that they're nodding or angling down. That's a good image right there. See the little urceolate or urn-shaped flowers? All right, they're pointing downward. And this is a raceme because you can hold the camera the same. You can see the individual pedicels on the flowers, which makes it an elongated inflorescence with stalked flowers, or a raceme, okay? So, linear-like, grass-like foliage, urceolate flower shape on racemes above the foliage. All of those indicate Muscari armenicum grape hyacinth. Hyacinthus orientalis. The hyacinth. Hyacinthus orientalis. Another geophyte. Geophyte, of course, meaning ground plant. These herbaceous plants that grow in the spring from some underground storage organ. A tuber, a bulb, a corm, a rhizome, something of that nature, but geophyte. All right, so Hyacinthus orientalis, the hyacinth. Now these are going to be bulbous plants coming from bulbs, all right, coming up in the late winter, only about 10 inches, maybe a foot tall, okay? A couple of neat things to identify hyacinth. First of all, look at those broad leaves. Now as far as any of the geophytes go, most have very narrow linear leaves, whereas the leaves on hyacinth easily can be 1.5 inches, close to 2 inches in diameter, okay? So these fleshy linear leaves of hyacinth are going to be broad, 1.5 inches, maybe to 2 inches, okay? Make note of that. Then secondly, let's take a look at the flowers. The flower stalks themselves coming up are born, the inflorescence comes out of the crown of the plant, and they're very short, very stout, and the flowers are packed along this inflorescence, okay? Now the inflorescence is a raceme, all right? The individual flowers have pedicels, so the individual elongated inflorescence with stalked flowers makes this a raceme. Now, a couple of things to note about hyacinth. With these, the colors of hyacinth are going to be white, pinks, and purples. All right, white, pinks, and purples are going to best describe the color pattern of hyacinth. Now, if you take a closer look, no one saw that, right? Look at the individual inflorescence, and I want you to zoom in so you can see the stalked individual flowers. You see those? Mm-hmm. Individual flower stalks, which is what makes this a raceme. And folks, if you thought Edgeworthia smelled good, this is a rival. It is a wonderful, very sweet, fragrant scent from hyacinth. One of the great things that these plants are known for in the landscape. They're also sold a lot as potted plants. You can buy them in the grocery store and the florist and put them in your home and enjoy that fragrance. Now what I want to do is, and I'm willing to sacrifice one of these inflorescences so that you can see that up close at home, but I'm going to take one of these flowers off, okay, just so you can see what one individual flower looks like. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to grab it by the edge of the petals and pull it. And what I want you to see is that the petals are fused. See how it's ripping at the base? The petals are fused. That is not true with other geophytes, which is why later we'll come back and reference this. But I'm going to do that one more time. And I want you to look at the petals on the outside, the corolla, all right? The corolla petals are fused so that when I do this, it tears them. See it tearing? And then it exposes the pistil, the stamens, and the ovary on the inside. So corolla, super fragrant, raceme inflorescence, only about 8 inches tall, Hyacinthus orientalis. Magnolia solangiana, saucer magnolia. Magnolia solangiana, saucer magnolia. Now folks, this is going to be second magnolia that we've learned this spring. This is going to be a tree-form magnolia. About 20 feet tall is a good average size of saucer magnolia. While it is a hybrid, all right, Magnolia X solangiana, there are many cultivars and many similar-looking magnolias. As we've discussed, this is a huge group of plants. But for the purpose of this spring, we're only learning 2, and that was Magnolia stellata, the yellow-petaled or yellow teepal-colored magnolia, and then this one, Magnolia X solangiana. Now I'm just gonna remove delicately, if I can, one of these flowers, all right? As we've discussed with magnolias before, they're perianth, okay? So the petals and the sepals are most often the same, so we refer to the entire structure as a perianth, and the individual members are gonna be tepal, T-E-P-A-L, tepal parts. All right, now, let's take a look. First thing, purple, all right? You get a lot of hint of purple, really deep purple in Magnolia solangiana, saucer magnolia. And if I were to take these tepal parts away, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Under a dozen, all right? Under a dozen tepal parts for saucer magnolia. Star magnolia, Magnolia stellata, had 15 to 20, okay? Many more. So under a dozen tepal parts. The individual tepal parts are really broad, 2 inches in diameter, nice purple color. All right, the only magnolia that we'll do that's 2 inches broad, purple coloration, precocious blooming, all of those things scream spring in saucer magnolia. Nothing says spring like Forsythia, Forsythia X intermedia. Forsythia, border Forsythia, yellow bells, a lot of name for these, but this is one of the most quintessential late winter, spring is coming, plants in the landscape. Forsythia X intermedia, again, Forsythia, border Forsythia are 2 very common names, and you can use either. Now, Forsythia is going to be a large deciduous shrub, and the leaves I'll talk about in a moment, as well as the other vegetative features. But just to quickly identify or to acknowledge the flowers, this large deciduous shrub is going to flower precociously here in March. Sometimes, depending on the severity of the winter, they can be in late February. But pure sulfur yellow, like sun, staring at the sun, which you should never do. But if you did, you would see Forsythia, all right? Now, a couple of neat ID features, which I think will make Forsythia pretty easy, all right? The stems of Forsythia, I'll talk more about the flowers in a second, but the stems of Forsythia are going to be square. All right, now whether, Becky, if you can zoom in on the plant itself or the samples that I have on the clipboard, but the stems of Forsythia are uniquely, distinctly square stems, okay? We haven't seen many plants at all that have square stems, all right? Now, the foliage, they're going to be opposite. Now, the foliage is just now beginning to emerge, one of the earliest deciduous plants to emerge in the late winter. And these leaves, folks, I know they're really small, difficult to see here, but these leaves will get 4-6 inches long, all right? At least 6 inches long. They're simple, they're alternate, they're serrated. I'm sorry, they're opposite, opposite, serrated. And we'll have to update you. Plus, I'll show photos in lecture portion of class so you can really truly see what the leaves of Forsythia look like. But right now, they're just immature babies, okay? So they will change, all right? But opposite, large leaves, serrated margins. But I want you to focus on the square stems. Those two things should make it very easy to recognize Forsythia. And then, of course, this time of the year, and of course, I'm always going to show you flowers, at least for the next few weeks for the spring semester. And these flowers are going to be clustered in opposite groups on either side of the stem. The individual flowers are 4 petals, all right? These 4 ligulated shaped petals. Because they're in shapes of 4, you could also use the term cruciform. Cruciform is a type of flower with 4 petals, as you can hopefully see in that illustration, all right? Sulfur yellow, no other color of any significance, all right? So just focus on the yellow, precocious flowering, cruciform flowers, square stems, and opposite leaves, precociously flowering. All of those things say Forsythia ex intermedia, border Forsythia, Forsythia. Chionomeles japonica, also pronounced Chionomeles japonica. Folks, this is our Japanese quince. Japanese quince. Now, the quince are going to be in the rosaceous family. So one of the things you may notice as you look at the flowers is that both at flowers and fruit, these look very similar to apples. Apples would be their first cousin, if you will. But a lot of the features of quince are similar to a lot of other landscape plants in the rosaceous family, all right? So, Japanese quince, how to identify it? This is going to be a relatively low, short-growing plant, about 3 feet tall, about maybe 3 to 4 feet wide. It's going to be deciduous or partially semi-evergreen, okay? So it may retain some of its foliage in the wintertime, but it'll lose most of it. Now, as you can see from this one particular example, this plant is precocious, all right? It flowers before the flush of foliage appears, and these flowers are going to range in size and color, pinks, white, varying colors of those. I'll show you a lot of the different color formats of the flowers during the lecture portion of this. Now, other key features for identifying it other than it being a precocious, low-growing plant. Well, the foliage and the leaves are going to be alternate, okay? These alternate simple leaves. The leaves are only about 1 inch in length. They're serrated. One of the cool things, now this doesn't come out until a bit later, so I'll have to show you later in photographs, but these alternate simple leaves will have stipules. And these stipules are reniform or kidney shaped, and those pair of stipules at the base of each alternate leaf, kidney shaped in size, will be persistent all the way through the spring and the summer. So a key way of looking for those reniform or kidney shaped stipules on the leaves of Chionomeles japonica, okay? Now, if you come in a bit closer, one of the other cool things that Becky will point out is that this plant has spines. Now, if you take a look at those really jagged, sharp structures, we haven't seen many plants this semester that have spines or thorns or prickles, and this being one of them, so this makes this a pretty short list of possibilities as to what this plant could be. So these spines about 1/2 inch long. You'll also notice that the foliage, as it is emerging, are on dwarf shoots. See how the foliage is clustered on dwarf shoots? In other words, you don't have individual leaves coming out of the stem, you have the dwarf shoots. This also is a good up close of this flower, 5 petals, multiple stamens. All right, this is very key for the rosaceous member of the family, but the colors, as I mentioned before, can go from pink to white and salmon, various colors of that. But one last shot through Chionomeles or Chionomeles japonica, Japanese quince.